Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to do an album review today, going through an entire album, song by song, and kind of breaking each one down and seeing how they fit both in a vacuum and within the larger context of the album. Today, we're going to be looking at Nile's Those Whom the Gods Detest, which is kind of interesting. I don't think this has happened before, where we have listened to a track from this album very recently. Track number 10 is called something. Oh yeah, Iskandar Dhul Karnon, which we checked out just like 3-4 weeks ago as a special selection. So I still have their sound from that track fairly recently in my mind. I did brush up on it just a little bit to kind of get back in that mindset. Um, I do think I'm going to have a tough time with lyrics on this one, so I think we're primarily going to look at music unless something really clicks for me. I don't know. I haven't looked at the lyrics yet. I try not to jump into that before the music because I want to get that very pure first listen on the music. But if the lyrics are anything like that one, there's a lot of concepts that are going to go over my head. So let's dive into this. We're going to start off with track 1, of course, which is Kafir. Let's see what Nile's bringing to the table with this album. Those mechanical bass kicks. Guitar like a buzzsaw. Ah, man.
And
It almost seems like they're purposefully shying away from staying on any idea for more than 4 bars. And of course, as soon as I say that, we get this slow chugging section for half a minute now. Really interesting decision there to place the height of those strokes in the middle of the attack. Interesting, this line was, in the first time we saw this lyrical section, we started there on the downbeat, and here it's on the preceding offbeat. Oh, maybe we didn't. Yeah, I think we always had the emphasis on is. Okay. These have to be some of the slickest pick sweeping I've heard. Or sweep picking. Dang, I can't even think straight. Incorporating that harmony into the solo. Alright. Alright. We barely had a moment's pause there, but it's pause enough. We gotta take a moment. I think even if it was gonna go directly into that third track, we were still gonna have to pause it. This is exhausting. We're 10 minutes into this album. It's a 60-minute album. So we're only a sixth of the way done. And I'm already done. My brain is fried. I'm pretty sure I said during uh the reaction for Iskandar Dhul Karnon that this is something that is interesting to me. I like tech death on a purely technical level, just imagining the raw musicianship on skill on a performance level. Oh, and that's not really different here, but there's a huge difference between listening to a 6-minute song and listening to a 60-minute album. And I do think that I'm going to become quite fatigued by the end of this, and I will be happy when the album is over. Not because I disliked it in broad strokes, but because it is going to mentally defeat me. This is a lot of a lot of a lot. And I'll tell you, when we finished Kafir and it went straight into the second track, I was like, oh no, please don't let it be one of those albums. Ah, man. Just because, like, and the thing is we have, we have two tracks on here that's greater than 8 minutes. Longer than 8 minutes, I should say. And oh man, I mean, our opening track was 7. This is just gonna be, it's gonna be a little trying for me. I'm gonna do I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna do my best to analyze these tracks with a melted brain. Okay, let's get into this first topic. Just nonstop aggression. There is no moment of release, no moment to catch your breath. The best you get is cutting the tempo by a quarter and going slightly slower and chugging. But the chugging on the guitars is still huge and heavy and weighty. The bass is punchy. The drums are just metal, and you have this dude just growling in your ear. And it's all so close to your face, right? The compression is right next to you. There is not much use of the sound sphere. It's a rather small sound sphere, and the sound is so large, it's really trying to break out of what little space it's been contained in. And through that, we just get this onslaught of weight and impact. And it is like I said, you don't get any release from it. You don't get a second to breathe. You are either being shredded at or having anvils put on your shoulders, figuratively, on both accounts. Well, no, the shredding at is literal. You are literally getting shredded at. The guitar is shredding at. You're not getting shredded. I can't even think. This album's just started and I'm already done. Um, but yeah, just the sheer veracity of it. Veracity, the consistency of it. My thesaurus game is off today. Um, it's nonstop. We had 10, almost 11 minutes straight of just constant sound. And the thing is, too, is some of these ideas, especially when we get to the faster runs, the faster shred, when you take the blast beats out of it, it does remind me of some of the stuff I love from prog metal, even some heavier prog metal. But it really is the combinations of the sonic qualities that come into play as well. It's not just the notes that are being played. I think that you could take some of these guitar lines, soften up the sounds around them, reduce some of the, not the technicality in the drums, but the abrasiveness of the drums. And round off the guitar tones a little bit and put some clean vocals with it and end up with some very cool prog metal. Well, I should say at least chiller prog metal. Um, but I think the real reason I wanted to bring this up is because I do enjoy some of these sounds. In contrast to something lighter, something that prog metal likes to do is to have these really high impact, heavier, faster moments and pair them with quieter moments, usually introducing acoustic instruments or clean electric guitars with clean vocals and lighter drumming while still utilizing the same complexity in the composition. This band does not go that direction at all. There are no chiller moments uh, for you to take a breath on. It's all killer, no chiller. Recording that. Everything here is designed to melt your face off, with no moment to put it back on. And for some people that is fantastic. And I can appreciate it on the purely technical level, especially when you get to live performances and you're playing this nonstop music for 60, 70, 80 minutes straight, and just the raw endurance of that. But as music to listen to 2 tracks in, I think I've had enough. Like, yeah, well, I've had my fill. Not that I want to get rid of it, but I'm just good for this sitting. Maybe give me an hour. Let me refresh my mind, get a palate cleanser, let me listen to some bubblegum pop for a second, and then we'll continue on with another track or two. um, on that idea though of just constant aggression though is this idea of mechanical accuracy. The bass kick assaults, the blast beats, gravity blast. I think we had a couple in there, and man, we're gonna have to talk about the drumming in general. The guitaring. I talked about specifically at a moment that I think they were sweep picking, but I can't tell because it was so freaking clean. I'm trying to picture where you would have to be on the neck to play these notes. I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe if your hand is moving real quick, it would all be one or two strings, but it would just be so much easier to shift strings. And maybe it's not perfect sweep picking where it's one note per string. Maybe it's two notes per string, given the melodic idea, but it's also so quick, just 16th notes, and it's so clean and perfect. The note weight is all precisely exact for every single note. It is just, when we get to those faster parts, they're typically paired with blast beats, and that's what overwhelms me. But if we just focus on, like, if I had just a guitar playthrough of these more technical parts, not the chugging, which tends to have technical flourishes at the end, but is mostly this rigid static stomping along to get there. But in the constant complex performative aspects, the shredding, I would love to hear that in isolation, just because it's honestly kind of beautiful in parts. There's obviously a section of it that is just gnarly, both in tone of the guitar and sometimes the notes they're playing, and kind of stepping outside the chord a little bit to pull in some nasty dissonance to just spice up things. But overall, it's kind of beautiful, and I think if you slowed it down, you'd find a lot of beauty within the note intervals and the overall melodic content. But it does sound cool at this speed, and I'd love to hear it in isolation, because the drums always, as soon as the guitar speeds up, the drums do too, and I'm like, oh, yep, dang, there's the jackhammer again. Speaking of the drummer, who I think I'm just going to start referring to as the jackhammer, um, the dude, man, just what if I just left it at that? No, he's a machine, first of all. Just the precision, the consistency, it is just nasty. But here's, I think, what the thing that separates the drummer for me is the type of drumming, which to me feels a bit more melodic. It's difficult to tell at these speeds because it just kind of ends up being a flurry of attacks, but it does sound really interesting the way that the drum patterns are phrased and the use of different instrumentation in each pattern. It isn't just alternating snare and bass kicks. It isn't just blast beats. The blast beats might end up being half of a beat or just one full beat, and they are a specific sound that gets played within a larger melodic idea. It's just really fascinating to listen to the drummer in some of these, especially the faster sections, when everything just starts to take off. Listen to what the drummer's doing, and you'll notice there's very little cyclical element to it. There's very few repeated sections. It is like a linear melody played through the drumming. It's just so fast. So sometimes I think that linearity is just going to kind of fly by you. Especially since the guitar is usually going to be in the spotlight during these sections as well. I don't think we have heard a drum spotlit section, like a drum solo, yet. So every time the drum pops off, the guitarist is also. And that kind of covers it up as far as spotlight and attention goes. But the drummer is just consistently doing these really neat melodic ideas, and the way that they ornament their more functional metronomic style of playing is also really neat. Like, this drummer's just they're on another level, especially when you start listening to the cymbal work and trying to figure out, like, I don't have a drum cam on this, right? So trying to figure out how the drummer is getting these snare and tom hits in between all this cymbal work, and like trying to figure out which hands would be doing what and how often they're switching up, what's the snare hand, because if snare is typically played with your left hand, but if your left hand currently has to be doing something else, your snare needs to be played with your right. And like, how often is that switched up just to incorporate all these ideas that they're trying to get in? The drummer and the guitarist are just on another level. The bassist is good, and keeping up with them, I don't know how they do it. But they're holding their own. I haven't really heard anything from the bassist yet. Honestly, I wasn't paying a lot of attention to them. The drums and guitar just instantly grabbed my attention on these tracks. But I'm gonna spend the next track listening to what the bass is doing, kind of seeing what they're adding to the formula. I hear movement in the bass, but like I said, I haven't really paid attention to any specific ideas that they've been working on. And the vocals are vocals. You know, I think I could say that they're the weakest part of the band, but when your bar is sitting at everybody being at a 10, the weakest part can still be a 9. They're still exceptional. They're just kind of weak compared to everything else. And I think a majority of that is just it's metal, right? Growling can only do so much, at least for what would impress me, right? What I look for in vocal work, which is usually variety of some sort. If you're a clean vocalist, range and pitch and dynamic work. If you're a harsh vocalist, variety of harsh tones. And this vocalist pretty much has one or two sounds that they sort of lean into. They're both on the lower end growl ideas. And so a lot of it just kind of blends into the background for me as texture, which is a bit of a shame, but I mean, the drums and the guitar are stealing the show anyways. So, um, but again, it's not like I'm throwing shade at the vocalist. They are a phenomenal growler. They have so much power and command. There is clarity to the vocals and great enunciation as well. There's a lot of attention to detail in the vocal delivery. That me saying that they're the weakest part of the band is not a bad thing. They're still one of the top growlers I've heard. Just growling's not my deal, and they just have other band members just deciding to take it to the stratosphere as far as skill is concerned. Um, a couple of things I want to point out specific to tracks 1 and 2, and then we'll look at some lyrics and wrap this up. The first one is just constant change. I had mentioned this during the first track. It seemed at one point that they couldn't go 4 bars without changing something up. It is part of what makes it exhausting, it's part of what makes it exciting, and it's part of what's going to make it less memorable for me. And again, not throwing shade. Repetition helps build memorability. It's why uh, catchy stuff is typically heavily repeated and simple. This is complex and linear. And if there are patterns, they're on a larger scale, not a smaller scale. We're not looking at a 4 bar pattern, we're looking at a 32 bar pattern, for instance. I don't know if that's actually what's going on here. A lot of this just sounds like linear jumping between concepts, but there might be a larger pattern at play that I missed. And so it's just not going to be as catchy. It's not going to stick with me. I don't think anything I've heard so far is specifically going to stick with me. It's going to be the overall atmosphere and feeling, right? This is the band that plays real fast and tight and technical and has a great enunciator for vocals, right? That's what the band's going to be for me. It's not going to be a specific lick or a catchy chorus or even any specific section on its own. It's going to be what the album ends up feeling like, which if they continue on this route, like I said, we still have about 5/6 of the album to go. But if they continue on this route, I think they're just going to be the band that plays fast with a ton of precision, with interesting drum work and great growls. But yeah, just a lot of this feels like throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I'm not going to say that every single section that we heard I thought was fantastic, but the thing was, if I didn't like it, all I had to wait was a few seconds and we'd be trying something else. Until we got to that chugging part in track 1, and then we just stuck with that for a good minute. And I'll say that was my least favorite part of it. I'm not a big fan of chugging to begin with. It has its moments, and you probably saw I was grooving with it. The chug comes in to create groove, I feel, is why they utilize it. Their more chaotic elements are not super groovy, and when they want the audience to kind of get into that, yeah, let's go kind of mode, they bring in the chug. I'm not sure if we're going to see that consistently through the album, but at least in our opening 11 minutes, that is how it was utilized. Every time it came in, it was designed to kind of chill things out a little bit in whatever that means to them. Because, like I said, I still don't find those moments chill, but they were, if we were at an 11, now we're down to a 10.5 as far as intensity. It is chiller um, in comparison, but every time it was just introduce some groove, give you something to move your head to. Um, oh yeah. So this one's kind of a two-part. I can combine two ideas together, two notes I wrote. One is at the end of track one, we went blisteringly fast. The guitar was going off, vocals were growling, drum was doing some crazy stuff. Um, and just this burst of speed was ridiculous. It was just, I don't know what it was. It's not the fastest music we've heard. I wouldn't even say it's the fastest technical music we've heard, but just how they built into it, where they came from, the context around it. It felt like uh I don't know, like you hit the nitrous in a car, right? You have this steady boost of acceleration. You have this feeling for how fast you're accelerating. And then there's a button you can push to just exponentially increase your speed of acceleration. And then you just feel, your body get pushed back into the chair. And this instant force of new G's. Speaking of G's, we have a local roller coaster called the Hulk, modeled after the superhero. And most roller coasters, climb up to the top very slowly. You hit over the top, and then gravity takes over, and you get off of the pulling chains, and you just let gravity pull you down, and you accelerate from there. But with the Hulk, it starts going up a little bit, and you think you think you know what you're in for, and about halfway through the incline, you just go from like, I don't know, it's got to be from like 5 to 10 miles an hour to about 50. It feels instant. It just launches you up, and there is no dip to come over. The roller coaster is now started. You go straight into like a corkscrew or something way up in the air. That's what this reminded me. It's just this instant burst of speed that's unexpected, and I think the unexpected part is what makes it feel so fresh. What makes it feel faster than it is. The guitar is just screaming through here, though, playing all these lines and licks and all these concepts. And it starts to play around with the sound of it until there's a point where it almost feels like the guitar is literally screaming. And I think it's a mix between like a harmonic hit plus a whammy idea, or maybe a string bend. And it just has this really nice microtonal smooth shifting between pitches with this really gnarly distortion, almost like tonality waviness coming into it. And it just sounds like he's making the guitar scream. And it made me think that we also heard this previously in a solo during that first track. And the guitarist actually does this a bit through the solos, through the faster sections, where it's not just about playing fast, but they play around with the timbre of their instrument. It's um, it's very cool, especially when, again, you think about the performative aspect. You have to go from playing at this super speed, all this precision, into pulling this emotive, slower element out of it, and having to physically slow your body down and work within these minutiae rather than sort of that heavy-handed speed you were going with. So that's pretty cool. The last thing I want to touch on, I don't think I have. Yeah, I think we went through everything. There is this section in the middle of track one, and I had mentioned there was a delayed attack. And what I mean by that is that usually the peak sound is going to be at the beginning of your note. So like da, 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 da. That opening D sound I have on that note is the loudest. It's kind of an explosive sound, right? What was interesting here was the drummer was heavily accenting the downbeats. This was, I think it was during a chugging section, but the guitars were fading into a peak and then fading out, which actually came after the downbeat. It sounded like the guitars were sluggish, like they were being played after the beat, like they were actually out of time with everything else. But it was actually because of this quick fade in that made the high point of the note, which sounds like the beginning of the note after the beat. I'm not sure what the point of it was. It sounded like, dragging your feet, being behind, just kind of not being able to keep up with stuff. It feels counterintuitive to everything else around it in the moment and around it as a whole. But maybe in the lyrics we'll touch on it. But it was a very choice moment that stuck with me, and and stood out at the time too. All right, I'm gonna hit some lyrics here. We'll see what's going on with those, and then we'll continue on with this album. All right, so for Kafir, I I recall their final track, the one we checked out last month, Iskandar, Dhul, Karnon. I had a real tough time understanding what was going on in it, and some people gave me some really great insight into it. And it seemed to be about religion and about Alexander the Great. I'm trying to remember if he was the prophet Muhammad or something like that, or if he was the prophet of Islam. I don't remember. And there was like some controversy about it, and some religious scholars were against the idea, but there was some proof that could like lead into it. And the whole thing was that they're supporting this idea. They wrote a song about Alexander being this person. Um, like I said, I'm probably missing some details on it, but it was very heavily drenched in religious discussion and basically them taking a side on it. So this album starts out with religious discussion and them taking a side on it. Um, we start out with the line repetition: "There is no God but God. There is no God but the one true God. There is no God but the hidden God." And we take this and condense it down to just the beginning: "There is no God." And then that gets repeated several times over. And then it almost feels like a prayer throughout the rest of the track. It is fully linear until we cycle back to this "There is no God" stanza. Um, and it says stuff like, "In the name of the merciful, in the name of the Lord of worlds, owner of judgment, show us the path of those who earn your praise. For the disbelievers, whether they're warned or not, for each one of them, they believe not, and theirs is an awful doom." So for everyone who doesn't believe in you, whether we warn them or not, whether we tell them to believe in you or not, they have an awful doom waiting for them. So this all seems straightforward, but I believe it's tongue in cheek, because the next stanza says, "O mankind, worship the God whom thou hast created." So you've created a God for yourself. You better worship him, or else, what is it you said would happen? Oh, you'd go to hell. So, yeah, you better do what you said you should do, or else something will happen that you can't possibly know about. And it makes everything else feel very tongue in cheek, which probably comes into all the names, right? In the name of the merciful, the benevolent, the Lord of the worlds, the owner of Judgment Day. Like that feels very tongue in cheek now with this new context to it. And then we come back to the idea of "there is no God," said over and over and over again. And I think this track is specifically saying, well, it's specifically denouncing religion. which is interesting because it takes us into the next track, which is Hittite, a Dung Incantation. I might be pronouncing the first word wrong. Um, it seems to speak of a specific ritual to remove a demon from someone. And as the title suggests, it is a dung incantation. It requires the excrement of a dog specifically. It might be told from the perspective of some sort of a priest, um, shaman, medicine man, whatever. I can't. It feels like it would be an older ritual, but there's a lot of cultures who still utilize older ideas like this, so it might still be in use. I don't know. But it says, "You come to me because you believe I can cast off demons. So I will mix the dung of a dog with barley flour and put it on your shoulders and feed it to you. There I have removed the demon Algamati from you, and I have pushed the demon Anamiluli from your skull. I've extinguished fire from your brow and ignited it in the sorcerer's head. I have driven away the stench of the dog, but the dog's excrement, the flesh, the bones must be utterly consumed, lest the dog's shade thinks it may yet return and will not rest, relentlessly tormenting you all the rest of your days." So, this person thought he had demons in him. The priest comes over, makes a concoction with dog poop as a base, puts it on this dude's shoulders, and says, "All right, the demon's gone. But you may be haunted by this dog now, so you need to fully consume it. Bone, flesh, and the excrement. Have a good day." And I'm really curious about this. Coming off of our first track, this once again kind of feels a bit gazing down the nose, right? Looking down upon this ritual, which to anybody who has a scientific leaning obviously seems far-fetched, right? At least for me in particular, I'm not going to try to speak for anyone else. I don't believe in demons and spirits and ghosts. So to have a demon stuck within you, haunting you, what do you say? Oh, actually, never used the word for it. Never said if it was haunting or controlling or anything like that. But anyways, just to have this demon in you to need anything like this ritual being performed, at least to me, is just a moment of misunderstanding. It's not a demon, it's some sort of other physical or mental issue, probably. But then to think that this is what would solve that is even more, even further from what I would say is something that would be an objective truth for me, for my understanding of the world, and how we experience it. So that, paired with the tongue-in-cheek opening and looking down on religion in general, makes me wonder if we're looking down on this as well. I'm just kind of curious what the point of this is, and maybe the rest of the tracks on the album will illuminate why this was here. This feels like an interesting place to go after stating there are no gods. And as usual, the caveat, I appreciate this might not be a concept album. I try not to look at things conceptually every time we have an album review, but it is still a pocket of time of the band, right? It's still a cohesive whole that encapsulates who this band was at this moment, and in a sense is still, it's still conceptual from that angle, from the production angle. So a lot of these lyrics are going to be, or are going to be conceptually tied in some sense that this is who the lyricist was at the time. You know, some albums are happier. Some bands have happier albums, and they also have, you know, more miserable, aggressive albums, and it reflects who the band is at the time. They're not concept albums in that they tell a story, but they are concept albums in that they tell us who the band was at that time. And so, you know, just whatever. I don't know where I'm going with this anymore. This is just a really interesting place to go next. Now, as far as tying these lyrics to the musical themes, no. I don't see a connection here. I think I've only heard the one track from Nile, which comes off of this album, so I can't speak about what type of music they play outside of this album. So far, this seems to be rather consistent of this technical death metal within the album, but I'm just going to kind of extrapolate and kind of guess that this is what Nile does. They do this tech death, in which case we just have them writing their bread and butter, what they are good at writing, what they enjoy writing, and the lyricist is writing whatever is interesting to them at the moment, which right now seems to be hyperfixated on religion and rituals. I don't know. We'll see where this goes through the rest of the album. But I really don't see a pairing between the lyrics and the music. So now that we are 45 minutes into this reaction, let's get rolling with the next track, Utterances of the Crawling Dead. Let's hit it. Yeah, really cool use of harmony. Something we don't hear too often, but have heard before. His vocals aren't really a growl, are they? Hear that? It really just kind of pushes into there. It makes them sound behind the drums, which gives it this really interesting dragging sound, just like in our first track. There's that scream. That's what I'm talking about, man. All right. The only reason I'm stopping here, because I don't really have a lot to say about this one, is because our next track is over 8 minutes. It's one of our longest ones. In fact, we're gonna have both of those back to back, an 807 and then an 840. Those will probably be separate tracks. And then everything after that, we'll probably do in groups of two. See how that rolls. Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment on the vocals, though. I noticed at the beginning, I had called them growls, and there is a lot of compression to them, but it also feels very close to a pitched sound. And I think, aside from the actual growls that he employs, he also has a compressed clean that he utilizes for a lot of it, which is what gives it that really strong enunciation. It has a clarity to it because he is singing rather than primarily using false chords to create chaos. Which is kind of an interesting way to describe harsh vocals, but I think is accurate. It's making a lot of different sound waves clash together and come out as a lot of crackling. There's you can control it, but a lot of it is just the noise of all these sounds bouncing off of each other. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up why I thought the vocals are very enunciated and clear and clean. In fact, I heard a lot of words in here. I heard a lot of words on the first track as well. I didn't hear any on the second, but it was also a really quick track. But yeah, it's very nice to have an aggressive, harsher tone that I can still hear that's produced in a way that isn't just static crackling. Interestingly, it's in the band where I'm least likely to pay attention to the vocals because there's so many other interesting things happening around it. Though that pulls me into an interesting next topic, is that this was a simple song. Granted, maybe not simple for other bands, but compared to the two tracks we've heard before this, we had a very clearly laid out A B A B C B, where our C was actually 2 seconds. We had our sludgy, trudging, slow section. Maybe not sludge metal, just sludgy and like it's long and goopy and stretchy. Um, into our guitar solo. So our C was kind of two parts. And then we did have an outro, I think, that was different from our return to form after the solo. But it followed that pattern. There wasn't a lot of wild shifts like in our opening track. We stuck with sections for a pretty decent amount of time. We weren't jumping around between ideas. And there was a lot more chugging and less chaotic guitar work on this one, as well as less fancy drum work. We did have some really neat ideas with some cymbals in our bridge. And I like the cymbal work in the chorus, but for the most part, this was a fairly tame track compared to the other two, which is a double-edged sword, I'd say. One, it gives me a moment to breathe. We just had 11 straight minutes of chaos, and this felt like a breath of fresh air. It felt like the weight had been pulled off me. Maybe I'm just acclimating to the sound as well. But musically, it felt like the weight had been pulled off me, and I could take a minute to breathe. But on the other hand, I found this to be a bit too close to traditional death. It's missing that technical element, and I'm just not a big fan of straight death metal, which this wasn't totally straight death metal, but did play around with leaning more towards the traditional sound, more so than our other two tracks did. And like I had mentioned, the technical element is really what keeps me here. If I were listening to this casually, it's what would keep me around rather than skipping songs or turning the album off. Because death is not really my genre, and the technical aspect is honestly a bit much for me. This is not stuff I'd usually listen to, anyways. Um, but there's a musicianship here that I really appreciate that I don't mind, having a listen to. So far, this is not an album I'm ever going to spin on my own again, but I'm going to be happy that I've heard at least once. Um, but yeah, without the technical element, just kind of leaning into more of a traditional death, it does give me a moment to breathe, but it also feels like it went just a hair bit too far in that direction, and was completely underwhelming after our introduction. Now, I don't think that this is going to be the new mode of operation. I know that the last track is all complex, wild stuff, and we have two 8-minute epics. Can we call it? They're longer than everything else. We'll call them epics. We have two 8-minute epics in here. Our next two tracks, actually, that I think will probably introduce more of the proggier technical concepts that I'm looking forward to. We might have a couple more tracks like this. I'm gonna wager maybe track 9, based off the title and length, and then we have a 2.5 and a 3.5 minute back-to-back tracks, and either one of those could lean into more traditional. I don't see their longer tracks being traditional death though, so maybe there's just really nice moments to kind of pause and take a breath and chill out for a little bit, and they're good songs for the uh, musicians to kind of just relax and get some stamina back. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about that one. So I'll hit the lyrics and we'll continue on. And we made another leap. I'm not sure if the Dung Incantation, Hittite Dung Incantation, again, is a real one. But if it is, that is a culture I'm not familiar with. But I do know that it is not the same culture as our opening track, Kafir was speaking about, which is the religion, I'm going to assume the Judeo-Christian one, talking about God or Muhammad or Yahweh, whatever you want to call him. And now on our third track, we are speaking about Egyptian mythology. We bring up specifically Shu and Osiris and Horus. All three gods I think gods. I don't know about Shu specifically. I'm kind of extrapolating from Osiris and Horus. But all three gods are name dropped here. And I mean, the title of the album is Those Whom the Gods Detest. So I do think we're going to be exploring myths, practices, and understandings of a variety of religions or cultures throughout this album. Now, unlike the opening two tracks, which still feel a bit tongue-in-cheek to me, looking down the nose at the practices or the religion, this one feels a bit more in reverence. And I wonder if that's because much like Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology has kind of been incorporated into pop culture in ways that um, is just really neat, but usually exaggerated in more of a Western approach to it. And this could be everything from the Mummy movies to uh, anybody remember an old superhero style cartoon in the 90s called Mummies Alive, I think it was called? And they were like mummies, but it was also like Power Rangers where they could morph into gods with they would shout with the power of Ra, and then they would like turn into super versions of themselves. Um, but even I think in the Marvel universe, Moon Knight is Egyptian, isn't it? So I think there's ways that we've kind of been introduced to these mythologies, um, and even Norse mythology through way of Thor and Loki, and even more recent, well, less recent, same recently, the God of War franchises movement from Greek gods to Norse gods. There's just a lot of ways that pop culture takes these elements and puts them into a more serviceable, fun package that hasn't really ever been done with Christianity or Judaism. Like, we don't have Jesus Christ the superhero. That kind of divorces itself from the original mythology and puts it into something that's packageable for a Western audience to enjoy. Because we do have more lighthearted ways of telling the stories of Christianity, like Jesus Christ Superstar, but I don't think we really have anything that kind of divorces it from the source material the way that some of these other mythologies have been. And maybe that allows them to feel cooler, right? You look down on Christianity, but you have this, you look at Greek gods, and you're like, these are cool stories. Maybe it's also that they're kind of fully understood to be mythology, whereas Christianity is still kind of used as something to practice and work within. It's still a modern viewing of the world. There's a lot of things that could go into this, but I do think it's interesting the first time that I feel the lyrics take a concept more seriously is Egyptian. Anyways, I have no idea what these lyrics are talking about, though. Just went on a huge tangent there. I know you guys are here for it, right? But um, these are long videos, and I probably should not. I should probably avoid what I can to extend them out anymore. But anyways, we have this person. He says, the demon who denies me, who cuts off heads and severs necks, who renders incoherent the words I speak, sealing my mouth against the magic within me, you shall not see me. Kneel on your knees, go with thy face behind thee. So he says, you, demon, who's been messing with me, right? Kneel and go away. He says, you should wander without purpose with your face averted upon the tormentors belonging to Shu, who relentlessly follow you, crawling after you to cut off your head and sever your neck. And we just kind of continue to go into this concept of, this demon that's tormented me. I wish all these negative things upon you. And then we get to the ideas of really bringing in more of the Egyptian mythology. It says, may your face be downcast at the sight of my countenance. May the flame of the eye of Horus go forth against you. For abhorrence of you is in Osiris, thus abhorrence of you is in me. I don't know enough about Egyptian mythology to understand what all this is, who this demon might be, who the demon of Shu is. Um, I don't know. So we're just gonna keep going. I'm kind of enjoying the music on this. I'm enjoying the flavor of the lyrics, even if I'm not enjoying, even if I don't know what exactly the ingredients are. It's still a tasty soup that's been made. Um, and let's keep this train rolling. What's up next? We have the title track, "Those Whom the Gods Detest." So let's see what's in store next. This is one of our 8-minute tracks. We'll probably pause after this, and then we'll have another 8-minute track. We'll pause after that, and like I said, we'll play it by ear after that. There's a very specific flair to this music, though. It's not in a traditional pentatonic mode that a lot of metal uses. There are moments that lean further into that, but it's right on the tip of my tongue. There's something that differentiates these guys just based purely on what notes they're using in what combinations. Very atmospheric. What is that instrument over there on the left? Yeah, I want more of these clean vocals. Here we go again with this constant changes idea. Really fun metric modulation there. We haven't seen a lot of that. Just constant tempo shifts, moving from eighth notes to triplets. Almost sounds like an alarm. Yeah, so far I'm really trying to find the bass. And I think at best they're just lining up with the bass drum, because the bass drum feels a lot beefier than it should. Yeah, really building the atmosphere. I'm glad they slowed the solo down. Yeah, cycling back to this part, I want more of these vocals. I think this is the first track we've heard, and I mean, track-wise, I think that goes right into the next track, but we're not going to run 17 minutes of music together. I think this is the first track we've had gang vocals on. I'm curious, as usual, what the thematic purpose of that is. It seems like a very specific intent. It's not something we've heard in the other tracks, so why do it for this one? This was more of what we heard on our opening track. Just tons of intensity, tons of ideas, tons of movement, just really great drumming and guitaring. We actually had quite a bit of vocal variety in here as well. We had our sort of clean compressed, we had the growl, we had a clean layered under one of our lowest growls. We had the gang vocals, and then we had all three of those vocals combined at the very end. Very, very neat. Also, very exhausting. I mean, just like our opening track. Well, we did have the intro to this and then a small moment in the middle, where we went to that acoustic instrument, and I don't know what it is. If somebody knows, let me know. It's on the tip of my tongue, and I can picture it. I just can't think of the name for some reason. Um, but it's just really nice to have that sonic breakup, just to have that new sound injected into this. That kind of helps break up the, I don't want to say monotony, but oversaturation of the aggressiveness, and we get this really nice, clean acoustic sound in there. Beautiful opening that also gives us a nice like 20 seconds to chill and breathe in the middle, utilizing the same instrument. Just really like the sonic variety that it brings, because it also brought atmospheric variety. It's not just always pressure and weight. We get a little bit of release, of reprieve, and I dig that. Um, what do I want to touch on first? Oh, all right, I want to touch on the solo first. I really like the solo in this one. It had a lot of the shred that we had seen before, but it did back off enough to not just do screaming sounds, but to lean into narrative writing. I thought that was a really great idea. We were building up towards a big moment at the end, and we started in the guitar solo. And not just we it's not just that we started with the guitar solo. We started in the guitar solo. The middle of the solo, after shredding for, 16 bars or something, they're like, "Oh, how about we start working towards that ending now?" And it was a bit rough, but we came back down to a moment that we could kind of work with, and stuck around with some suspended notes and started building atmosphere. And it was just a really great idea that we also just don't see too often. Usually the solo is the beginning of something or the end of something, or it's just a part of something. It's not usually a transition point within itself. And I thought it was really neat to utilize the first half to be like, all right, guitarists, go ahead and shred. We know what you like to do with these solos, but also don't forget we're going somewhere. And the guitarist just stops halfway and is like, all right, yeah, that was fun. Let's start building towards this ending. So I enjoyed that. Something that I haven't really gotten to talk a lot about yet, because it didn't really click with me until just now, is that the solos are frequently played over the most chaotic guitar riffs. I don't know if this was true with track 3, because it was a little more traditional with its metal. But tracks 1, and don't think we had a solo in 2. Tracks 1 and now 4, the solos, all 3 of them, because I think we had 2 solos in track 1, are over just the most bonkers part. And here, it's actually over our intro, which was also our verse 1 idea. And it is just constantly changing. Every 2 to 4 beats, we're doing something different. We start with blast beats, and then we do this rising and falling thing in the guitar work, and then we get these fast, frequent 16th notes, like da 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 da, but they're like faster, because I'm not gonna try to mimic that. Um, and then we're back to like blast beats, and then we're back to like a rising falling idea, and then we have just this pedal note riding concept to just drive home some weight. Like, it's just always changing, and these are the types of ideas that our guitarist likes to solo over, which just creates for very chaotic sections, because our guitarist likes to shred, likes to play just as fast. So it almost ends up feeling like counterpoint, if not for the production, where the underlying guitar bits are pushed to the side and our soloist is centered, but it's still 2 ideas vying for the spotlight in my mind, and it's really interesting to decide to do that. It's very rare, I think, in jazz for the soloist to be soloing over something that's trying to steal the spotlight. There's a lot of a lot of jazz standards will have the entire band cut out for the soloist. It's just the soloist in the rhythm section. Rock kind of, well, rock and metal kind of took that up as well. A lot of rock and metal guitar solos end up having the guitar soloing over a chord progression, usually something that might have been used in the chorus more so than a lick or a riff that would have been used in a verse. And this even goes back to some of the older classic rock and roll that we've heard on the channel as well. It's just such a common idea to put solos over chords. Make a foundation, put a melody over it. This is, composition 101 right here. And these guys said, make a melody, put a melody over it. And it works for some reason. And these aren't like rules, right? I say this all the time, tools in a toolbox. You can make whatever music you want, and as long as you execute it well, execute it. As well as you execute it well, it's going to turn out fine, right? Even if it's not palatable, you're executing on your theme, your idea or whatever. You can make something that doesn't sound great but still is good, and that's where a lot of avant-garde music comes from. It completely goes against convention, does stuff that is not traditionally palatable, and but still good music. And that's where I'm kind of leaning on this. Like, I would never in a million years think to put a solo over this kind of music, and yet they consistently do it. And I do think it gets just a little too chaotic, but I also think that that's the point of those sections. So, who am I to say that it's wrong? Especially when it sounds good sometimes. What I really love, though, is on occasion, the solo will harmonize with an idea that the foundational guitar is playing and kind of work part of that riff into their solo. And I think that is very cool. Speaking of harmonies, we just don't really have a lot on this album so far, so it was really neat to start this one off with some harmonies, and then eventually get the texture layering. Not really vocal harmonies, huh? Because it was a growl and a clean, but it's the closest thing I think we're gonna get with vocal harmony, so I'm gonna call it that. It's really nice to see more harmonies on this track, just overall in general. But more importantly, what I think I want to talk about before we go into the lyrics is transitions. This band is not. Let me rephrase that. This band doesn't care for smooth transitions. That's not what they are. This very much, and it clicked with me on this track, especially with the speed that we were moving between ideas here and the lack of regard for if one concept leads into the next at all. Reminds me a lot of the same criticisms I had for Between the Buried and Me's debut album when we checked that out last year. I think we have been doing album reviews for a full year now, haven't we? We started in January of last year. Maybe December of last year. Either way, it's only been about a year now. But many of the same criticisms I had for that album, um, especially regarding their cohesiveness and transitional ideas, I have for this one. It's just a bunch. It's a series of ideas, a series of licks, a series of riffs that they kind of toss together haphazardly and then say, well, that's our riff. We do a little bit of this, then a little bit of that, then a little bit of this. We put this in there. We went to this, and now we're just going to play that over and over. And I think you really have to like this sort of eclectic composition style of just being chaotic and trying to control it. And they do a good job of controlling the chaos. It's really difficult to see the ties between everything, but it does end up working on a larger scale. Moment to moment, it's kind of rough. But at the speed they're playing, looking at a bird's eye view of an entire verse, it does work. And there is a pattern to it. And there is a larger concept of a repeated riff. It's just made up of a lot of smaller ideas that don't necessarily smoothly move between each other. And we can even look at this on the larger idea of when we move from one riff into another. And usually it's just we were doing this, now we're doing this, and that seems to be their operative mode for transitions on the entire album. I haven't really heard anything that is smooth, and I think even a little bit of smoothness, a little bit of foreshadowing or fading into, which would be cliche, but would be a step up from just the rigid smashing together of two ideas. Um, I haven't really noticed anything like that. And I think even the smallest thing, like a smooth fade from one to another, would stand out a lot to me given the context. And as usual, though, like I just mentioned, tools in a toolbox, it's not bad that they're doing this. It's just not my cup of tea, which makes it stand out a little bit. I'm not a big fan of it, so every time I hear it, it does kind of grate a little. And they do it a lot. So, let's move into this next one. When we finish it, we will be halfway done with the tracks. We'll be done with 5 out of 10 tracks. However, this front of the album is front loaded with the longest one, so I think we're going to be at like 65-ish% done as far as total time. Oh wait, silly. We still have to do lyrics. So, let me hit the lyrics on this real quick. Okay, this is interesting. I had mentioned how our last track kind of had less of a tongue-in-cheek vibe, and it just happened to be our introduction to the Egyptian element, the Egyptian mythology in the lyrics. However, this seems to take a lot of the negativity, maybe animosity, towards the Judeo-Christian religion in our opening track and applies it towards the Egyptian mythology here, which is pretty cool, I think. Says my nature is rebelliousness. That's who I am. I am hostility made manifest, and I defy the words spoken from the mouth of Ra. Unrepentant, I deny the secrets of the text. Impenitent, I blaspheme the sacred scrolls. Unwilling to submit, I embrace what Ra hath called profane. So I do everything that they say I'm not supposed to. I go against the sacred scrolls. I don't care to learn the knowledge of the texts of this mythology, and I do everything that the central god tells me not to. It says, I will not hail to those who rise and set. I will not bend to those who imprison people at his will, who would rather bathe in my blood and drink my gore. I have no fear of the second death. No god or demon will feed on me. No blind servant of the throne of Ra shall I willingly allow to devour me. There's a lot of this concept of being consumed. I don't know if that's a big part of the bad afterlife. Does Egypt have a bad afterlife? I say Egypt. I mean Egyptian mythology. Um, but just a constant idea that I will not bend the knee to a god, right? I will do, in fact, I will do the exact opposite. And we finish it with supreme and terrible Ra, who maketh gods and men tremble. I am counted amongst legions of the unrighteous, who dread not being immersed in pits of fire. We are they whom the gods detest. And so this is told through the lens of Egyptian gods, but I kind of get the idea that it's kind of a stand against all religion. It just happens to use the visuals and symbolism and gods of particularly the Egyptian ones. But this is why the gang vocals are in there, right? Because he says, I am counted amongst legions. I am just one of many of the unrighteous, right? And the title of the song is Those Whom the Gods Detest, but the chorus never says that. It is always we are they whom the gods detest. Speaking about unity, right? Strength in numbers. We are they. Interesting. All right, let's keep this train rolling. Move on to the next track. This is our longest track, just shy of 9 minutes, the fourth Arra of Dagon. And that's not a mistype. I am pronouncing it like it should be ERA, but it is not. It's ARRA, and we're just going to have to go with that. So let's hit it and continue this trip. Some gnarly sounds. Dagon's one of the old gods, right? Cosmic entity in the Cthulhu line. Oh, I gotta remember to talk about that. Their metric modulations are always fun. Dang, dude's still on them pedals. There's a lot of these really interesting bends going on in here. Still trying to figure out that instrument, why it's there. A lot of like metal on metal screeching in here, like squeaky brakes. Oh, it's Arra. Fourth Arra of Dagon. Alright, there's still 30 seconds left in this track, but I think it's going to be an intro to our next one. So, just on the off chance, I really hope I'm not screwing this up. So I was wrong. Their two 8-minute tracks were not the most progressive. Those Whom the Gods Detest certainly was, but Fourth Aura of Dagon leaned a lot more on the traditional death elements. We had a lot of chugging throughout this one, including, the 2-minute outro, which just, I really think this could have easily been a 5-minute song. I will say, though, I'm curious if these shifts to the more traditional death style, with the beefier, chuggier guitar style, is thematically purposeful. Track 3, Utterances of the Crawling Dead, was about... Oh, that was the one where he told the demon to go back I mean, maybe it was supposed to embody the slow crawl. Um, but at least for here, right, this is about an elder god. This is about Dagon. These elder gods are enormous. They're giant. They're so weighty. And so their movement is going to seem slow to us. And the weight of that, plus the fact that peering upon the elder gods typically brings insanity, which I think also gets tied into some of the musical choices here, probably explains why this is not as mechanically interesting as the rest of the album is. And they do a great job at creating this weight. The guitar tone that they use for these chunkier dum bum 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 kind of ideas. It's very wide. It's got a lot of low end that they don't typically utilize when they're shredding, when they have their faster ideas. It definitely carries a lot of the weight that they don't always have in their music, and thus the contrast of it through uh, just being placed up against more faster dexterous playing makes this feel chunkier, makes it feel heavier, makes it feel weightier. And it works, absolutely. But like I said at the end of Utterances of the Crawling Dead, this just isn't for me in any regards. There's so little in this specific track that I felt I could find interesting or fun to listen to in a capacity, in any capacity. This is exactly the style of metal that I'm just not a huge fan of. And leaning into it at the end, like, yeah, the bass kicks for 2 minutes was impressive. Um, I can't imagine the stamina required to play that live, but aside from that, I think it's just supposed to sound epic, and I don't get that. And I'm gonna chalk that up to a personal thing, right? I mean, they have the big gang vocals going on, and our growler is way down there in perceived pitch on these growls. Like he's really pulling in some dark tones, and the guitars have this really chunky, sound going on. You got the double bass kicks for days. Um, I do think it's supposed to sound epic, but it just doesn't hit that for me. One thing I do want to touch on though that I really am enjoying throughout this album, and I haven't touched on yet outside of a couple of "Hey, did you notice that?" moments, is metric modulation. Anytime that it feels like we get slower or faster, um, and sometimes those are direct tempo changes. Sometimes it's just moving between straight and tuplets. Um, Sometimes it's just changing up the length of the notes. We were using 16th notes, now we're using quarter notes, and that's going to make it feel like we've cut the tempo in a half, quarter. Um, and just modulating between all of these so that we do have these shifts of fast and slow, but they're very rarely ever directly half speed or twice as fast. We are frequently shifting into things that feel possibly a third or just cutting off 20 or 30 BPMs or something like that. And so the songs end up having these interesting moments of almost like shifting gears, where you got to get off the accelerator, engage the clutch, shift the gear before you can start accelerating again, before you get back into that groove. And it's these moments of where the car kind of feels like it pauses. And yeah, I'm sure there are people who are just phenomenal at shifting gears and it just is completely smooth, but that's never been my experience with it. Maybe, well, I've never been in a car with a professional driver either, so I'm sure that changes things. But even people who have driven stick all their life, there's still that moment where you have to let up off the gas, as short as that might be. And there's that moment where you sort of hit this, you're no longer accelerating. You hit this moment of sort of suspension, almost like that moment of zero G's at the top of a jump, especially on like a trampoline. And you have that moment where you're sort of just like hovering before gravity starts to pull you back down. That kind of thing happens here a lot, where you can just kind of feel the song shifting gears, taking a second to get into that next tempo. And it's really interesting to feel those. I think it's kind of fun. But it does also lean into my criticisms of the transition, in that they're very rarely ever foreshadowed or smoothly leaned into, or anything like that. So it is kind of iffy. It's like I'm enjoying the spontaneity of it, just like I enjoy the spontaneity of the throwing so many different ideas back to back, and just the hyper complexity of that. But as far as storytelling, I do feel like there's a lot of disjointedness, and the tempo changes, the metric modulation do play into that, but it is also 100% the sound they're going for. Um, I had mentioned at one point that there was a lot of metal on metal scraping. There was some really interesting guitar sounds, and there was something else in here. Oh, that random instrument that just popped up every once in a while that played on top of everything. It was acoustic but louder than our electric instruments. Um, I don't know. I don't know what the purpose of that was. All these weird sounds, though, I'm just going to kind of chalk up into the insanity concept of Elder Gods. I don't know. That's my best read on them. They've not been introduced in any of the other tracks. They are specifically here, and I'm guessing by the title we've moved away from the Egyptian themes into the Elder Gods. So I'm gonna hit the lyrics and we'll figure that out. Interesting. So this is about guarding oneself against Dagon. In another sense, this track is about going against another god, in this case, an elder god. It talks about painting uh, symbols, signs on flat stones, and leaving them across beaches and anywhere that the elder gods could pass. Specifically, Dagon, I suppose. I don't know if the runes are agnostic or not, if they'll stop any god, but specifically, they'll stop Dagon. It says that these signs should be written and placed by any of those who dwell near the submerged city of Cyclopean. Otherwise, Dagon will rise up from the ocean and go upon your shores and mess things up. There will be terrible vengeance. Um, and so, yeah, it's once again a defiance of the gods. Interestingly done in a different way, and one that is a god that is very specifically rooted in fiction. I don't believe the elder god started out as an actual religion or culture that was practiced. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Lovecraftian horror is fiction first, which very separately places it against Egyptian mythology and the Christian religion. But still a god nonetheless, and one that our lyricist slash narrator wishes to revolt against, which is pretty cool. um, but since it's not about Dagon and is about taking steps to participate in a ritual, oh, it's another ritual. Kind of lines up with track 2. And another display of a. Well, okay, so then track 2 isn't about revolting against a god. Yeah, track 2 still stands out as an odd one. I'm not quite sure So I'm not quite sure where it fits in with the rest of the themes being explored here. Anyways, musically though, this lyrically it doesn't deal with Dagon, it deals preventing Dagon from destroying your area. So the weight and the odd sounds that I had talked about that would have leaned into the size of Dagon and the sheer element of insanity that gazing upon an elder god would inflict on you don't really apply unless they're just utilizing the music as sort of the stand-in for Dagon. Lyrically, we're preventing what the music represents from happening, which, I mean, it's kind of a cool angle to go on to. Anyways, that's that's the best read I got on that. Interesting topic though. We're going to be moving on to permitting the noble dead to descend to the underworld. This one is only 3.5 minutes long. The next track is only 2.5 minutes long. Looking at 6 combined. Probably just going to let them run together. Maybe if I have nothing to say about them specifically, we might even run into track 8. I don't know. We'll see. Play it by ear. Let's hit it and continue on with our journey. Oh yeah, we have our intro here. Interesting to delay the resolution on that. It was kind of an intro to this. More of those harmonies I've been asking for. So I heard Osiris get name dropped again. I mean, I know they're called Nile, but it's interesting the Egyptian fixation when the album seems to be kind of encompassing all deities. That's kind of a fun riff. Interesting, the cyclical element of this riff. This is Phrygian dominant. It just barely got touched on there. They're working adjacent to Phrygian somewhere though. And that's what gives them their unique sonic identity. For a track with Descend to the Underworld in its title, there were no descending guitar riffs in there. Just cyclical ones. So we have the sounds of bones rattling, people chanting, talking. We've heard this instrument before too. This is the one I called out in track 3, was it? They really pushed some of these up. Like, there was a break there. That's not a lead-in, right? But it had like half of a second of silence before pulling the next track up. I want to talk about that real quick. I'm sure there's going to be people upset with me about this decision to stop the song there. I really tried to time that in the silence, but there was so little of it. So, permitting the noble dead to descend to the underworld was an interesting track in that it was highly cyclical. And what I mean by that is, I think it was one of the more structured tracks, but also featured multiple instances of the guitars not chugging, not sitting on a single tone, not going crazy and doing 5,000 things in a single riff, but just rising up in notes and coming down in notes, almost like a wave. But for whatever reason, I think it was because of the harmony of it, it felt more like a circle to me. We would go up to a note and come down to the note, come up to the note, come down to the note, and then we would change. We'd move down a third, and we do the same thing. Go up to a note, come down to a note, and we did this so much. We did it in the guitar solo. We did it in the first verse. We did it in our outro. It's kind of boggles my mind. The song is not about descending to the underworld, and maybe this is the key thing. The title is permitting the dead to descend, and maybe the cyclical element is a conversation or an argument as our narrator attempts to persuade people or entities or gods to allow the dead to finally go to the underworld. I don't know, but it's just so interesting to not have any straight descending concepts in this track. We'll figure that out when we hit the lyrics, though. Other than that, though, pretty much a straightforward Nile track. What I found more interesting was the Yezd Desert Ghul ritual in the abandoned Towers of Silence. And if you knew this album, you knew I was going to stop here to talk about it. First of all, this song does not belong on the album. Hyperbolically, of course. It's just such a deviation. We have none of our usual instruments, none of our usual composition patterns, none of our usual techniques or ideas. It is an instrumental made with brand new compositional ideas, brand new instruments, brand new timbres. It is primarily environmentally engaged. A lot of it is dealing with the ambient sounds of being in this tower while a ritual is taking place, and you hear the people talking about it or performing the ritual. You hear bones clattering, which I think are actually a percussive element. They're not part of the atmospheric because they are rhythmically consistent across bars, if I heard that correctly. We do have one instrument we've heard before, but it was quite rarely used in that one track, and here it is the featured instrument. So it does a lot of things differently. It does not fit at all with anything going on around it. And that's probably why I appreciate it. It is a moment for me to rest and calm myself for the last 30% of the album we're moving into, to take all of this aggression and weight and speed that we've experienced for close to 40 minutes now and be like, okay, just gonna breathe and get ready for what happens next. And it also showcases a different side of the band, which I appreciate. This is moving away from cacophony, from the thrill of excess, right? I think that's what I want to call this style of music. It's interesting because there's so much to it. It never sits still for long enough to make anyone bored. You might not enjoy the speed that they shift between things, but you can't tell me you're getting bored of any of this. And we move away from that element of excess to simplification, rhythmic simplification, melodic simplification, timbre simplification. This is in all ways the counter opposite to everything we've listened to thus far. And I find that interesting. I'm beginning to think that these songs don't really share too much in common. We do have a vague idea of this concept of revolting against gods, and we've seen that in a lot of things, but it also just seems to be focused on ritual in general. Whether that ritual is practicing a religion or is telling stories about a mythology or about literally looking in God's face, any God's face, and saying, we won't follow you and you can't change that. Track 2 still is just an anomaly, although, like I said, in the idea of rituals, I think it works. And here we have another ritual. Except this time, instead of using language to talk about what's happening in the ritual and music to set an atmosphere and tone, or possibly even showcase the characteristics of the ritual sonically, we literally just use audio, field recording. Maybe it's not field recording. Maybe this is recreated from, I don't know, notes or something. I'm not going to say that they went out into the desert to capture this ritual. They might have. Maybe no one practices it anymore and they had to recreate it. I don't know. Either way, it appears to be field recordings of this actual ritual taking place. It is atmospheric and environmental in a way that the music has not been up to this point. I wish I had something to say about the instrumental choice, about the melody played on the instrument, but I don't. Much like most of the music here, I have a real tough time pairing the musical concepts with the thematic ones. Especially since we've heard the instrument before. If this was a one off, a brand new instrument, I was like, okay, maybe they used it in order to create the vibe of this ritual, which is probably going to be devoid of electrical instruments, electrical anythings, right? It's going to be an old age ritual, pre-electricity. So I could have said that, but it's not. We've heard this instrument before in a context with the rest of the band, so it's not a one-off on that. Um, and while it might still be able to be read in that manner, there are no electric instruments because this is a pre-electrical ritual. It doesn't say anything about the specific instrument's use here. It could be any acoustic instrument and still fall in line with that reading. So let me hit the lyrics on Underworld, and we'll continue on. So I don't have a real strong read on this. It seems that our narrator, protagonist, stands before, I don't know, like a table of deities. And he says, I know you and I know your names. And he goes on to name, he's like, you're Osiris, Lord of the mysterious of body. Gives command, puts breath into those frightened ones whose art's in the midst of the West. He says, you're Osiris. This is your big deal here. He goes, I know you all, and I know your names. He says, may my place in the darkness be opened, and may a spirit shape be given to me, and Rosa Jiao. I don't know what that is. Even to the Lord of the gloom who dies at the devourer of serpents, his voice is heard, but he is unseen. I mean, if I take the title, it's like he's asking these gods to go into the underworld, right? That's why he says, give me a place in the darkness, give me a spirit shape so that I can exist here. Maybe that's what he's asking for, but I don't know entirely. This might be something that needs a little bit more Egyptian mythology knowledge. Much like the last track, I needed more, well, English history and Islamic knowledge to understand that one. I'm actually surprised, given how confusing the last track was when we checked it out last month, how much I've been able to pick up on most of the stuff throughout the rest of the album. But yep, here track 6 is this, I think. I'm a little stumped. This one's outside of my knowledge. Track 7, of course, was an instrumental, so no lyrics on that. Let's dive into our next track, Khem, Khefa, Kheshef. See what's going on here. the cymbal and the snare blast beats. That's such a fun little riff. An ascension out of the pits into this higher range to solo around it. That snare work. That metric modulation into this real sluggish mode. Of course, I was going to show how they switched to triplets, and then they switched out of triplets. All right. So, keeping up the intensity to the end. We had a moment to breathe with the desert ritual, and now we are ready to get right back into it. I feel like we've kicked off into a speed that we haven't seen for a little bit. This certainly wasn't in the Underworld track. Arra of Dagon was a little bit of a mix of both. So I'd say this is probably the speed we last saw at Those Whom the Gods Detest, track 4. And we've really kicked it back into that gear. We took some time in between to chill just a little bit, and now we're back up to where we should be, ready to finish this album out. I'm still expecting Eye of Ra to be a little closer to that traditional death sound that they usually have, but Iskandar Karnon is finishing off our album with a bit more of that progressive element, if I remember correctly. Everything that I've said so far, I don't think I have changed my opinion on at all. The vocals are still very nicely produced, very nicely done entirely. Everything from the performance, the delivery, to the production. Um, the drums are still so sick. Did you guys hear the blast beat, snare, and ride cymbal there at the beginning of this track? That was bonkers. That and the cymbal work, the fills, the embellishments. The drummer's still crazy. Just on another level. Absolutely. And it ties into a lot of what I love about tech death in general is this just raw precision, right? There is no sloppy playing anywhere on this album. And it just really makes me appreciate the drum work because I can hear it so crisp, so clearly. Which kind of leads into accuracy. That was another note I had. Me being physically exhausted. That I literally wrote on the side, I'm gonna get tired. I am. If I was listening to this casually, I'd probably put on track 9, listen to the intro, maybe skip a little bit into it, kind of check out what the verse is doing, skip a little bit into it, check out the chorus, and then probably skip to the last track. I've already heard it in the past, but if I hadn't, I'd probably do the same thing, and I'd probably wrap both of those up in about a minute's worth of scrubbing rather than the 12 minutes that it's actually going to take up, simply because I have quite had my fill of this excess. I'm so mentally done with this. It is so much music. Um, I appreciate it, but like I said earlier, I would do much better with pockets of 2 or 3 tracks in some cases than the full hour in one go. This is not something that I have the training for, I suppose you can call it, right? It's like trying to bench 400 pounds. Well, that's probably too much. I don't know what a good, like, what is a good weight to bench press? Obviously, I'm not a bench presser. Somebody who's real big on bodybuilding, but you don't start from the big numbers. You got to start low, right? You got to build up the resistance and build up your own personal strength for it. And I just don't have that strength built up for this type of onslaught. I'm sticking it through because that's what I do. I think that's one of my better features, and probably what makes me a good reactor is that no matter what, I will listen to something through to the end and give you my honest opinion about it, with a little bit of critical appreciation. Um, but yeah, I'm done with the album. I am. It has tired me out. I'm gonna finish this and take a nap. Maybe watch some SpongeBob. That's a joke. I don't usually watch SpongeBob. I used to. My kid used to like it, but she grew out of it. And it's if I was gonna watch a dumb cartoon, it'd be Teen Titans Go. I'm gonna take some flack for that, but I love that show. What else was on my list though? I got sidetracked. Oh yeah, the solo screams. We still continue to hear those. The guitarist just starts shredding, and then, like I said, I think there's a harmonic with the whammy bar idea, and just gets this gnarly, slow slur. Sounds like the guitar screaming every time. No release. I'm still on board with that. I did mention we had a little bit of a gap there in 5, 6, and 7, where we kind of took it down a notch. 7 was definitely down a notch. So there is some release in the album as a whole, but song to song, no. This is just constant pressure. Um, and I have a note that says constant change, and that's what I was talking about, their tech death stuff. But we have seen quite a bit that has shifted more towards the um, less chaotic traditional death metal stuff. And I'd say the album's pretty 50-50 at this point. So, I think that's interesting too, because when I think of other technical bands, whether we're talking about technical prog rock, technical prog metal, tech death, they're technical all the time. And I think that's something really interesting about Nile, is that sometimes they're like, let's take it down a notch, guys. I think we've been going crazy too long. And they'll still keep the weight and intensity that death metal is known for. It's just with more chugging ideas and less complex riffs, and just less chaotic composition overall, where they stick with an idea for more than a couple of seconds. And it balances out nicely, I think. I still prefer the technical stuff, simply because I'm not a huge death fan, but I think for people who like death metal and technical death metal, this probably hits a really nice medium. The transitions are still rough. The metric modulation's still sick. So yeah, pretty much all the notes I wrote within the first 2 to 3 tracks is it's still accurate here. We'll hit some lyrics and then we'll wrap this up. We're gonna move into. Now I'll save that for after the lyrics. And once again, I think these are lyrics that require some specialized knowledge. Um, we bring in a couple new characters now. We have Ray, we have Rerick, who is the enemy of Ray. We have Apep or Apep. We bring up Set, and I thought I knew who Set's related to the Underworld, isn't he? I don't. Oh, speaking of, we actually had Seth earlier. He called himself. This was on Permitting the Underworld. Nope. This was on. Oh, yeah, this was Those Whom the Gods Detest. He says, I am the murderous Seth. And as far as I could tell, let me pull up a personnel list here. Our lyricist is Carl. So I'm curious who Seth is. And it is close to Set. So maybe that's a typo on the lyrics. Maybe it is. Maybe Seth is an actual Egyptian character. I don't know. But this goes into a lot of story about these characters. It begins with, get back and crawl away, get away from me, thou snake. Be drowned in the lake of the abyss, at the place where thy father hath commanded that thine slaying shall be carried out. So go drown in the lake where my father commanded you would die, right? But then we go into all these other elements of like these other snakes and their enemies and who they oppose, and we bring up the Cobra. Cobra is capitalized, so I don't know if that's just the Cobra might have been a revered animal, or maybe there is a god named Cobra. I don't know. And we go into like all this crazy context though, and like all of it goes right over my head. I'm honestly curious if this is more This requires more specialized Egyptian knowledge to understand what's going on here. Which still surprises me because I think for the most part, let me look this up real quick because I need to contextualize this. The Hittites were an Anatolian people who played an important role in establishing First Kingdom in Kursara, then the Kheshef Kingdom. It encompassed an area that included most of Anatolia, as well as parts of the northern Levant and upper Mesopotamia. Oh, okay. So smack dab between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, in the 1300s BC. It's actually a pretty big area, too. And this would have been around the area of Turkey. So that's interesting, too, then. So that's Turkey's Eastern Europe. So we open the track with Western. Can we call it Western religion? Because it has so much stake in Jerusalem. It's really weird to call Christianity a Western religion when it is very much Middle Eastern. But we start off with the Western religion of Christianity, it seems. Although the opening track kind of calls out a lot of gods, but it still does, at least to me, feel very Christian focused. And then we move to this culture in 1300s BC Turkey. And then we spend 8 tracks looking at Egyptian concepts, and we wrap the track up with this Middle Eastern European clash of scholars and ideals about who Alexander the Great was in response to in parallels to Islamic teachings. How do we go from Judeo-Christian to a small culture in Turkey to Egyptian back to Judeo-Christian? It's a really interesting journey to take on this album. Lyrically, musically, we've been pretty standardized this entire time. I'm really curious how our lyricist took this journey and decided that this is what they wanted to write about. The last thing I want to touch on before we continue on is just the lyrical element. There's a lot of old English in here, even just in the opening stanza of Khefa Kheshef. Get back, crawl away, get away from me, thou snake. Be drowned in the lake of the abyss, at the place where thy father hath commanded, that thine slaying shall be carried out. It is part of what has made this set of lyrics so difficult for me to figure out, especially when it's talking about concepts that I don't have the information to understand. But you may have noticed as I've been talking about the lyrics, I use more modern words to speak about them. I am paraphrasing what the lyrics are when I talk about their topics. Because the lyricist really loves to sound like he's speaking Old English. And it's not every sentence, it's not every line of every stanza, but there are certain times they just really want it to feel old. And I don't know why. If it was consistent, we've listened to some, especially I feel that black metal does this a lot, where every single line is spoken in Old English. And it makes more sense to me there. Here we have more of the Old English. What is the ordering of words called? There's a term for that in language. I can't think of what it is. But the ordering of words is definitely older, but we don't always use the older words. It sort of finds a middle ground between sounding older and also being understandable to a modern English speaker, which I think it's good in and of itself. But it kind of dances between function and form for me. Functionally, it's better this way because anyone can pick it up and get the general gist of what you're saying, but it's kind of lost its form through that. It feels like a half measure. So I don't really know how to feel about it. I think it doesn't really feel odd until we get some of those older words thrown in. Like at the very end of Kem Khefa Kheshef says, "So saith the terrible one." Just previously, it said, "Crawl away, Rarik, snake enemy of Re, thou who escaped massacre in the east of the sky at the sound of the roaring storm." It's flowery language. It's kind of reversed some orderings of the words, but for the most part, it is quite readable. And then we get the word saith. "So saith the terrible one." And just, it feels kind of cheesy in that regard. And these are things you don't really pick up on during the song because the growls kind of obfuscate it. There is clarity. And I've said, if I really pay attention to the lyrics, to the vocalist, I can hear the words. But it's not usually what I'm paying attention to. So the cheesiness doesn't come through like it would with power metal. But reading these lyrics, and every once in a while just throwing in a saith or a maketh, yeah, it feels kind of weird. If they had gone all the way with it, I think it wouldn't be as distracting. All right, we are going to wrap this up. We have 2 more tracks to go, one of which I have a full reaction to. I'm still going to give some thoughts on it in context to the rest of the album, but and I'll touch on some of the themes of the lyrics, but I've been foreshadowing. I've been talking about it this whole time already, and I do have a full, in-depth, like 50-minute analysis of it that we'll link right there. Did that work? Oh, of course it didn't work. Anyways, we'll link it right there. If you're interested in that. So we'll run both of these back to back. We'll do in-depth on Eye of Ra, and then we'll do a slight analysis on the final track and tie the album all up. So let's hit it. I love the rhythm on the drums. Those pocketed snare rolls are really interesting as accents. called it though. The Eye of Ra was going to be a bit of a more traditional death. Yeah, that was fun rhythmically. I wish we had heard more of that. The vocalist getting in with the metric mod stuff. And see, this is interesting now too. Even musically, I'd say we've stepped away from some of the modes we were in previously. Certainly signifying the shift in lyrical direction here. Oh, I remember that. It's a really interesting phrasing on that. That, yeah. That's big. I love this drummer's flow so much. Back to our opening. I do remember more of this song than I thought I would. The ride cymbal. Listen to this. Or don't, because we're not going back to that section. This is the fastest they've played on the whole album. And once again, a solo over the most chaotic section. I don't remember this though. Interesting way to end the album. Like I said, I don't remember that ending at all. Are we done? Yeah, I think we're done. I mean, more of the same. I don't know that I have anything to add to either of those. I do wish they had showcased more of our intro and outro of Iskandar in the other tracks. Maybe this is something they explore further in other albums, but I think they have a knack for really great atmosphere. I don't know how to really pair that with their tech death. It would be, I think it'd put a lot of weight on the producer to find space for it, and then even compositionally, what's its role going to be? You already have so much movement, you would either add on to it or you would run counter, in which you need to make space for it in your comps. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a reason that we only have that style of music as intros, outros, and exclusive sections, such as in the ritual. We don't hear any of that atmospheric writing within the metal. And for this specific style, I suppose that makes sense. It'd be very difficult to effectively put it in there where it doesn't feel like it's at odds with what the metal is doing. Still, I think it's a bit of a shame that it was primarily put on our final track here, where I think it would have been cool to hear some more of that in other places. just because I think it does really good jobs at set dressing. I think they do a good job with how they crafted them and used, well, even just sound effects, like that final screeching sound that we had at the end of Iskandar, where it wasn't really an instrument, it was just kind of scraping, high pitched scraping. Um, I would love to see them play around more with that. I did make one final note here, and it's because I don't know how I never picked up on this. The drummer uses 16th or sometimes 32nd note snare rolls as accents. Now think about this. When we accent a beat, right? Um, Say I want to accent beat 3 out of a 4-beat phrase. Boom, boom, ka, boom, 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 ka, boom, 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 ka, right? It's a very sharp attack to signify that extra emphasis, right? Our drummer puts 4 notes into that one hit, and they're so sharp and short that they feel like one stroke entirely. So much so that my brain just kind of glossed over it. Those are just the snare accents. But I think it was like track 9. I started to pick up on these, and they were in 9, they were in 10. I'm sure they were in all the other ones. These really quick snare rolls as accents. Anytime that the snare is going to accent a beat, sometimes we'll get a single hit, sometimes we'll get a roll, and it's just how? Why? I mean, the why is obvious. It sounds cool. But how? Just I'm really kind of blown away by it. I wish I had picked up on that earlier because it is a seriously cool technique. That takes a ton of skill, right? It has to be perfect at such a speed, or else it's not going to feel like an accent. It's going to feel like a fumble, like you meant to get a single stroke out of it, and instead you got this roll. And it's just so tight. Man, it is, the whole drumming aspect is mind-boggling. Some really cool guitar licks in Iskandar, as we already knew I was going to say. Um, and the Eye of Ra, like I had said, they kind of went for more of a traditional death metal sound there. There was some technical progressive sections to it. It wasn't a standard structure. And we did have one really cool guitar section, but for the most part, we were looking at chugging with a lick to punctuate the phrase. Um, with a little bit of movement at times. The drumming was a bit more rigid. We didn't hear as much of the really fancy melodic drumming. I called it. It just made sense compared to how the album was going. And the best way to bring the intensity down to end on a super high note so that this gap feels like we are even higher than we were. If we had ended on a 7, or sorry, if I have Raw was a 7 and we end on a 10, yeah, it's a bigger point, but we are almost kind of there. If we bring it down to like a 4 and we end on a 10, yeah, now this feels big, right? So you don't actually have to change much. Contrast can be wielded to great effect in anything, right? Not just audio. You can use it in film, you can use it in writing. I'm sure you can use it in painting somehow. Contrast between, oh, multimedia actually makes real great use of this to help certain aspects stand out, right? Yeah, contrast is just such a great tool in any artistic creativity, creative output. And it really helps exaggerate elements so you don't have to work as hard exaggerating them. Yeah, let me hit the lyrics real quick and we'll wrap this up. All right, so the Eye of Ra, and I'm curious again if this has any, if it's based off of real mythology. Because at least this one I can understand without any extra knowledge, but with the other two, I really think that the lyricist is just really fixated on Egyptian mythology and is super knowledgeable about it. There are certainly some tracks like this one that can be read surface level, but there's a lot of stuff on this album that points me in the direction that this dude isn't just a fan of it, but really enjoys learning about actual, not even just the mythology of it, but even just the culture of ancient Egypt. Anyways, this seems to be the story of Ra, of course, an Egyptian god, comes down to earth, takes the form of a mortal, and looks at humanity and realizes that they now hate him. They've turned on him, they've burned the temples, they curse his name. Um, so he returns to the sun, gouges out his eyes. He's in terrible pain, tons of rage, and he begins to call out Sekhmet and Nessert. And they come forth, and he says, "Take me away from humanity." Oh, he tells them to flee from humanity, um, because Ra is going on a rampage, and Ra continues to go down and slaughter all the armies of man. He says, "No one shall stand alive where I have been." And he says, "The joy of killing gladdens his heart, and he will wade in human blood and drink his fill." So, yeah, a nice vengeful God right there says, if you're going to stop praying to me, I'll show you why you should have prayed to me in the beginning. Y'all have just forgot the punishment that comes from it. Um, and descends down, tells the other gods, run and hide for a bit. You're not going to want to be here for this. Um, Interesting way to end an album that seems on the surface for several situations to be about defying gods of several religions. Specifically, though, we do have quite a few about Egyptian, which again makes sense. Their band name's Nile. There's obviously some fascination with the region and culture. But yeah, at the end of all of this flaunting their arrogance and blasphemous ways to the gods, especially Ra, who gets name dropped quite a bit. Ra and Osiris, I think, are the two that get called out the most. Ra comes down and annihilates everyone. I think that's a really interesting way to end your album about this, especially with the song Those Whom the Gods Detest, which at the very end said, "You can't strike us down, there's so many of us. I exist within such large number of the sinful," or whatever, the unrighteous, I think was the word he said. There's so many of us. We are those you detest. And Ra's like, yeah, hold my godly nectar. I'll be right back. Gotta show these fools what's up. And the lyricist wrote this in as, the not canonical conclusion, but at least as far as the album is concerned, the temporal conclusion to this story, because of course after this we leave our 7-song Egyptian pocket to go into this track about Islam and Alexander the Great. So I just think that's a really interesting conclusion to this whole Egyptian middle section of defying the gods and a god coming down and slaughtering them for it. Interesting. And then, of course, like I said, we end it with this controversial take that Alexander the Great was indeed the prophet Muhammad. And some scholars see that there's truth behind it, or they see some things that might point towards it. Some other scholars disagree with it entirely because, well, they have their own arguments. And I think there's also a little bit of just that can't be because, we have a Middle Eastern culture with Alexander the Great, English Alex. I can't remember. He was European at least. Messiah. sort of, or not Messiah, prophet in the middle of it. And this whole song is about saying that Alexander the Great was Muhammad. They're obviously on that side of the conversation. All right, I think that wraps this up. An exhausting album full of a ton of hard hitting songs, whether it's hard hitting through weight or through complexity and just tons of sounds. There is plenty of showmanship, of chops, just pure musicianship on display here from everybody. Um, and it's so well produced, it's so well performed. The composition is good in most places. It's not my cup of tea, but as I stated at the beginning, I was happy I listened to this. I would not mind listening to another Nile album if it were different. And I don't even have any, like, if it were different in this way. I mean, yeah, I could probably make some stuff up for that, but I think any way that that I would want it to be different still would, it'd still be a bit too much for me. They would have to back off a little bit. Uh, Chill out with the aggression, especially on the production. That was something I noticed. You know, I had mentioned that some heavier technical bands and progressive bands that I've enjoyed in the past, they're on the same level of technicality, but I really think it's a production thing. Like the guitars and drums are just very aggressive in this, and they feel weighty, and that really adds a bit of weight to the experience of it. Um, so I would like to listen to more Nile, but if it's more of this really weighty sound with the relentless assault um, of music, might be a one track, two track kind of deal rather than a whole album. But if they do change it up a little bit, soften up a little bit, but keep the complexity, yeah, point me in that direction. Um, Interesting album thematically as far as lyrics are concerned. Yeah, I'm just overall, I'm glad I got to check it out. Those are my thoughts on Nile's Those Whom the Gods Detest. What did you think? If you're still here 3 hours later, did you enjoy this? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? I'm sure there's a few places where I was a bit wrong, especially in some of the mythological elements. And there's a couple things that went over my head too, if you want to help me with those. Um, Put all that stuff down in the comments section. Above the comments is a description box. In there, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. All right, tomorrow morning, live stream with the patrons. Tomorrow evening, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That hopefully that live stream will be available for public watching. And then on Monday, we start next week's theme. 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As usual, oh, we'll be exploring death metal. Well, what a fantastic way to move into that. Well, that's neat. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.